At first, the German gunner thought the British tank had been damaged before it even reached the beach. It was crawling out of the channel on the morning of June 6, 1944, blunt and low in the water, with its tracks grinding through the shingle. But the strange part was the turret. Where a tank gun should have been, there was no long barrel, just a short, fat tube, too wide, too stubby, almost embarrassing. Inside the bunker, men leaned toward the firing slit to get a better look. One of them made a joke, another laughed, someone called it a dustbin. The nickname was better than they knew, because the little tube on that Churchill tank was about to throw a 290mm demolition bomb at a wall of reinforced concrete. Not a shell, not a normal tank round, a bomb. And when it hit, the bunker did not crack. It did not merely lose a corner. The front of it came apart. 1 meter of concrete steel reinforcement, machine gun slit, and the men who had trusted all of it vanished into dust and pressure. The joke lasted less than a minute. The silence lasted much longer, and the weapon that did it was not some battlefield improvisation. It was not a lucky experiment welded together at the last moment. It was the result of a problem the British Army had been bleeding against for years. How do you kill a fortress when your men have to cross open ground first? Because by 1944, the Allies understood something brutal about German defenses. A bunker was not just a building with a gun in it. It was a machine for turning time into casualties. Every second it stayed alive meant more infantry pinned down in sand, wire, mud, or surf. Every minute gave the defender another burst from a machine gun, another mortar correction, another chance to stop the assault before it became a foothold. And ordinary weapons had a terrible habit of making bunkers look damaged while leaving them alive. A standard tank gun was built for armor. Its job was to punch through steel. Against a tank, that made sense. Against concrete, it could be disappointingly neat. An armor-piercing round might scar the surface. A high-explosive shell might chip the face or shake the men inside. Artillery could eventually do the work, but artillery needed timing, coordination, ammunition, observation, and luck. The infantry did not need eventually. They needed now. They needed a weapon that could move with them, survive the first storm of fire, drive up to the obstacle, and end the argument in one blow. That requirement produced one of the strangest armored vehicles of the Second World War, the Churchill AVRE, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, and at the center of it was the Petard spigot mortar, the ugly little launcher that German soldiers learned to fear as the weapon of the Flying Dustbin. The man behind the whole family of vehicles was Percy Hobart, a soldier so difficult and so original that the British Army almost threw away one of its most useful minds. In the 1930s, Hobart had argued for tanks used with speed, concentration, and independence. He believed armor was not just a steel horse for infantry. It was a force that could shape the battlefield. That made him visionary. It also made him inconvenient. He offended senior officers. He fought old assumptions. He did not sand down his opinions to make them easier to swallow. By 1940, while Britain was fighting for survival, Hobart had been pushed out of the regular army and was serving as a corporal in the Home Guard. One of Britain's sharpest armored thinkers had been handed a rifle and told to guard the countryside. Winston Churchill brought him back, not to behave, to solve problems. Hobart was given command of the 79th Armored Division and a mission that was almost perfect for him. Find every obstacle that ordinary tanks could not handle, then build the tool that could handle it. Minefields, sea walls, soft sand, anti-tank ditches, flame-resistant strongpoints, concrete bunkers. The answer became a zoo of machines that soldiers nicknamed Hobart's Funnies. There was the Sherman crab, with chains whipping the ground ahead of it to detonate mines. There were bridge-laying tanks. There were armored bulldozers. There were tanks that rolled out matting so vehicles could cross soft beach sand. There was the crocodile flamethrower tank, feared not because it was elegant, but because it made defending a position feel suddenly impossible. And then there was the AVRE with the Petard. It looked ridiculous because it was solving a problem that normal-looking weapons could not solve. A conventional gun has a basic limit. The projectile must fit inside the barrel. Make the barrel larger, and you get a heavier gun, a bigger recoil problem, and a vehicle that becomes harder to use. But the Petard was not built like a normal gun. It used a spigot. Instead of firing a shell through a long tube, it launched a bomb from a rod. The bomb fitted over the spigot with its propellant charge in the base. That meant the projectile did not have to be shaped like a normal shell. It could be huge. The Flying Dustbin was about 290mm wide and carried roughly 18 kilograms of high explosive. A British 25-pounder field shell carried less than a kilogram, so the AVRE was not trying to peck at concrete from a safe distance. It was driving close enough to make one massive argument. The range was short, usually around 80 to 100 meters. That sounds like a weakness, and in a tank duel it would have been. But the AVRE was not hunting panthers in open fields. It was an assault engineer's answer to a fixed obstacle. Get close, aim at the bunker, fire, and change the shape of the battlefield. There was another detail that matters because it has often been repeated incorrectly. The Petard did not require some doomed crewman to climb out of the tank every time it reloaded. The launcher could be tipped, a front hatch opened, and the loader pushed the next round into place from inside the vehicle. It was awkward. It was slow. Roughly 2 minutes between shots. But against the target it was made for, 2 minutes usually did not matter. Because one shot could be enough. The reason was not magic, it was material truth. German bunkers were built to resist penetration. Thick concrete, steel reinforcement, narrow firing slits, internal compartments. They were designed so that blast and fragments stayed mostly outside while the crew survived inside. That logic worked against many weapons. But 18 kilograms of explosive arriving almost directly against the structure changed the problem. The blast did not behave like a neat bullet meeting a wall. It shook the wall as a body. The shock moved through the concrete. Reinforcement that helped against cracking and penetration did not make the men inside invulnerable to a demolition charge that overwhelmed the structure itself. A bunker was supposed to be shelter. The AVRE made it feel like a coffin with a firing slit. And that psychological change mattered almost as much as the physical damage. For years, German soldiers on the Atlantic Wall had been taught by their own defenses. When the shelling starts, get under concrete. When aircraft come over, get under concrete. When tanks appear, stay in the strong point and keep firing. Concrete meant survival. Then British demolition tanks started turning that rule inside out. Rumors traveled faster than orders. The British had tanks that could knock out bunkers with one shot. The little gun was not little. The concrete was not safety. The firing slit was not an advantage if it gave the AVRE a clean target. And once soldiers believed that, the entire emotional architecture of the Atlantic Wall began to crack. A defensive system depends on men trusting the places they are told to hold. If those men start believing the bunker will bury them, the wall has already lost something that cannot be rebuilt with cement. That is why the AVRE mattered on D-Day. Not because it made the landings easy. Nothing about June 6th was easy. The beaches were mined. The exits were watched. The water was cold. The timing was fragile. Men drowned, bled, burned, and fought through a morning that had been planned in offices but had to be survived by bodies. But on the British and Canadian beaches, specialized armor went in with the assault. At Sword, Gold, and Juno, Hobart's machines helped clear mines, bridge gaps, open exits, and attack strong points at the moment those jobs had to be done. The AVRE did not wait behind the battle for a tidy engineering phase. It was the engineering phase, armored and moving under fire. When a bunker stopped the advance, the answer was not always a long argument with artillery. Sometimes the answer was a Churchill tank crawling forward with a stubby tube on its turret. And that brings the story to the decision that still leaves a hard taste in the mouth. Before the Normandy landings, the British offered their specialized armor to the other Allied forces. The British took them. The Canadians took them. The Americans accepted some specialized ideas in other forms, including amphibious tanks and engineer equipment. But they did not build the Omaha assault around the same British toolbox of AVE flails and demolition tanks rolling with the first waves. There were reasons. There are always reasons. Logistics, training time, compatibility, confidence in American methods, the difficulty of adopting strange foreign machines just before the largest amphibious operation in history. Those reasons were not stupid. But Omaha Beach was not impressed by reasons. At Omaha, German defenses were positioned with murderous skill. The bluffs looked down on the sand. Fields of fire overlapped. Obstacles slowed the approach. Many amphibious tanks failed to arrive where they were needed. Engineers and infantry had to fight forward under a weight of fire that made every yard feel purchased. Without AVREs to drive up and smash concrete strong points at close range, many positions had to be dealt with by men doing the most dangerous work a battlefield can ask of them. Crossing exposed ground toward a machine gun that is still alive. No single machine would have made Omaha painless. That is fantasy. The currents, the terrain, the German deployment, the landing errors, the loss of armor, and the sheer violence of the beach all mattered, but the contrast remains impossible to ignore. On beaches where Hobart specialist armor worked with the assault, Obstacles and strong points could sometimes be attacked by machines designed exactly for that job. At Omaha, too many of those jobs fell back onto human bodies. That is the tragedy behind the Flying Dustbin. Its story is not only that a strange weapon worked, it is that a strange weapon existed before the battle, was offered before the battle, and was not everywhere it might have been needed when the ramps went down. After Normandy, the AVRE kept moving through northwest Europe. The beach was only the beginning. German troops turned farmhouses into fortresses, villages into kill zones, rubble into defensive nests. Any hard structure could become a problem for infantry, and wherever that problem appeared, the AVRE gave commanders an answer they could understand in one sentence. Bring up the demolition tank. The Petard was not elegant. It did not have the clean menace of a long anti-tank gun. It did not look like the future. It looked like someone had misunderstood how a tank was supposed to be armed. But war has a way of humiliating elegance. A beautiful gun that cannot do the job is decoration. An ugly tool that solves the problem is doctrine. Percy Hobart understood that better than the officers who had once dismissed him. He did not ask what a tank was supposed to look like. He asked what the battlefield needed done. If the problem was mines, build a tank that beat the ground with chains. If the problem was a gap, build a tank that carried a bridge. If the problem was soft sand, build a tank that laid its own road. If the problem was a concrete bunker holding up an invasion, put a demolition charge on an armored vehicle and drive it close enough to matter. That was the hidden brilliance of Hobart's Funnies. They were funny only to people who judged weapons by appearance. The men on the receiving end stopped laughing, and the men behind them learned the new rule quickly. If the British demolition tank appeared, the bunker was no longer the safest place on the battlefield. It might be the worst. There is a kind of military genius that looks clean in diagrams, arrows, timetables, unit symbols moving across a map. Hobart's genius looked uglier. It looked like chains thrashing mud. It looked like rolled matting on a beach. It looked like a Churchill tank carrying a short pipe that made trained soldiers laugh through a firing slit. But the measure of an idea in war is not whether it looks serious before it is used. It is whether men are still laughing afterward. On Sword Beach, a German crew saw the Petard and thought the British had brought a joke to a concrete fight. Then the dustbin flew, the wall failed, and the joke was buried with the bunker. The Atlantic Wall had been built to make men feel safe. The Flying Dustbin taught them what safety could become.